Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on the latest developments on the PFAS restriction proposal. Our event is going to run until 12 o'clock today. My name is Raya Ziga. I will be the moderator for today's meeting. And I'm part of the REACH&CLP Helpdesk Luxembourg. Before we begin, let me make a few practical announcements while also people are slowly joining in. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, so the recording will be made available on our website and our YouTube channel. Second, as you can see, the chat function is disabled. However, you can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function. If you prefer to remain anonymous, you can activate the anonymous setting in the Q&A tool. We will address the questions at the end of the presentation, so there will be a Q&A session at the end of the event. So before we dive into the first presentation, let me give you an overview of the program today. After this introduction of our activities and help desk tools, we will give a background and state-of-the-art of the PFAS restriction. We are joined today by a few nice speakers who kindly joined us today. We have Audun Hagelund, who is going to present the application of fluorinated gases from the insights of a dossier submitter. And we also have Peter Jules Nielsen, who's also going to present the sides of the construction products, being one of the two sectors are quite famous in Luxembourg, or of importance, best to say. We will also have our colleague Xavier, who is going to share the implications for industry and the supply chain. This presentation is going to be in French. And afterwards, we will have the side of our Administration de l'Environnement, where Kim Engels is going to present the enforcement in Luxembourg related to the PFAS restriction. So with this, I will start giving some, sorry, I'm on the wrong. Related to our help desk, just a general reminder, we are a technical support service following the REACH Article 124 and the CLP Article 44, where member states shall establish national technical support services to provide manufacturers, importers, distributors, and downstream users with advice on their respective responsibility and obligations under these regulations. So our objective is to advise and assist Luxembourgish company in complying with the requirement of the REACH and CLP regulation. We proceed in 3 languages, in French, German, and in English, and you can find all our material, tools, and relevant information on our website, reach.lu. You can find there technical and relevant information related to REACH CLP, but you can also find the link to our other website, the popschemicals.lu, where you also find some information related to the POP substances, the obligation that comes with the regulation, and so forth. You can subscribe to our newsletter, where we have, you can find it in the resource center angle, where you find access to subscribing to either the monthly newsletter or the SVC alert. And we have our YouTube channel, where you can find also our past events that are also available in the archives of our website. Our YouTube channel hosts our past events, but also the Betrieb en Umwelt platform. And we usually have subtitles in 3 languages, being French, German, and English. You can also find information on our activities, relevant information for businesses, and other reposts from European and local partners on our LinkedIn. Our LinkedIn page is, however, only in French. This is an example of our past posts related to PFAS and other topics. So with this, I will also proceed with giving the small background and state-of-the-art presentation on the PFAS restriction. So what we will see in this presentation today, we will go with what the PFAS are, why they are used everywhere, what is the core problem. We will go through the general restriction procedure and its timeline, plus some details on the PFAS restriction itself, what was assessed, some points on the ECA Scientific Committee's opinions, and what are the next steps. So to start with, the PFAS stands for the per and plurifluoroalkyl substances. It is a large group of thousands of man-made chemicals. Their defining feature is an extremely strong carbon-fluorine bond. This bond gives them several properties like a resistance to and repellency of oil, water, dirt, and also stability under extreme conditions. Electric and thermal insulation property, efficient. They are efficient refrigerants and surfactants. And with these unique properties, PFAS are essential in hundreds of applications across almost all industrial sectors, being textile, food contact material, transport, electronics, metal plating, energy, medical devices, and so forth. And the main driver for the regulatory action is the extreme persistence of PFAS. They are exceeding the criteria for very persistent under REACH by far. And with this persistence, we also have other concern being bioaccumulation as they build up in living organisms. They are mobile in water and they travel long distances in air, as well as they accumulate in plants. They have some global warming potential, and they are toxic. So PFAS, once it enters the environment, it can enter at any stage of the life cycle during manufacture, use, and the end-of-life stage. They accumulate, as said, in soil, water, air, and in the human body, and they are very difficult to break down. So this makes them, the consequence of these property is also well documented in several studies, especially on the human effects, like we can cite effects on the immune system, liver damage, reproductive harm, and several cancers. And they spread into drinking water and food crops, and the concentration might increase over time as well. So to understand the scale, in 2020, approximately 265,000 tons of PFAS were used in the European Economic Area. The top 3 uses are textile, fluorinated gases, and transport, and every year about 70,000 tons are emitted into the environment. Just from the use phase alone, that does not even include the manufacturing or the waste end-of-life phase. And if no action is taken, an estimated 4.7 million tons of PFAS could be emitted over the next 30 years. Now let me briefly explain how a restriction works under REACH. So any EU member state or ECA, at the request of the European Commission, can propose a restriction. Once adopted, it applies immediately to all manufacturers, importers, all downstream users across the European Economic Area. There's no tonnage threshold, and usually it covers also imported articles. The objective of a restriction is to limit or ban the manufacture, use, or placing on the market of substances that pose an unacceptable risk to human health or the environment. And the key difference with the authorization is that the authorization is a substance-specific, applicant-driven process, meaning that it allows individual companies to continue using a substance of very high concern, SVHC, for specific application, provided that they demonstrate that the socioeconomic benefits outweighs the risk and that no suitable alternative are available. So the authorization is granted for a limited time and applies only to those who apply for it, not to this whole sector. This scheme was borrowed from the ECA website. You can find the link of the source down in the slide, where you can also find more details on these phases for the restriction procedure. We also have a past webinar related to our REACH restriction series for more detailed information. But without going into further details, just to enumerate the different phases, we have first the preparation and the submission of an Annex 15 restriction dossier by a member state or ECA. And then we have a public consultation phase where initially on the restriction report itself and later on the SEAC draft opinion. And third, the development of the opinion by the Risk Assessment Committee and the Socio-Economic Analysis Committee, both of which also involve public consultation opportunities. And finally, we have the decision-making phase by the European Commission and the member states, which also usually, well, not usually, it has to be followed by an implementation phase and compliance monitoring and, of course, enforcement by the national authorities. Just to give a small overview or small outlook into how long it takes to prepare a dossier, I have allowed myself to borrow a slide from our German colleagues where it represents the timeline from a dossier submitter or a dossier preparation and the amount of work put in to submit the proposal. So for this proposal, as it is one of the biggest dossiers submitted in the REACH restriction history, let's say, it took 3 years for the dossier preparation to be finally submitted in 2023. And here you can also see the full timeline for the PFAS restriction. As said, it was submitted in 2023 by 5 member states, being Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. And from 2023 to 2025, ECA scientific committees, REACH and SEAC, they have been evaluating the proposal. And in mid-2026, or at the end of last year, REACH have adopted its final opinion, and SEAC have recently finished the public consultation on its draft opinion that was running from March to May 2026. We are in the phase of the adoption of the final opinion of REACH, and their opinion is expected by the end of this year. And then we will have to wait for the Commission opinion and the final decision. Moving forward, we will start diving into the PFAS restriction. So I will start by giving the chemical scope of the PFAS that was involved in this restriction. So a substance considered as a PFAS under this proposal if it contains at least one of fully fluorinated methyl or methylene, a carbon atom with no hydrogen, chlorine, bromine, or iodine attached. So this definition is actually aligned with the OECD definition from 2021, and it covers more than 10,000 individual PFAS substances. Only a few fully degradable subgroups were excluded before they do not persist in the environment. What does the proposal cover? So it, as previously mentioned, it covers the manufacture, use, and placing on the market of PFAS, and it applies to PFAS as such in mixture and, importantly, in articles, including imported articles. All uses are covered unless a specific derogation is granted. One important exception is the firefighting foams are not covered in this restriction proposal, as they are addressed in a separate complementary restriction. When it comes to the transition period and the restriction options, this will be better explained in the following presentation. But to be general, the proposal included two restriction options. We have first the general transition period being of 18 months from the date of entry into force, and then the options we have. Option 1, a full ban with no derogation, meaning only the 18-month transition period, and then option 2 comes with a ban with a use-specific time-limited derogation after the 18-month transition. Certain uses may receive an additional 5 to 12 years to phase out the PFAS. These derogations are proposed based on clear criteria, primarily the availability and the applicability of the alternatives. The reason for these options is to compare the proportionality of a full ban versus a ban with targeted exemptions. To move forward, this slide gives an overview of what was assessed, or the sector of use originally submitted in 2023. They are going from textile to food contact material and packaging, consumer mixtures, cosmetics, key wax, metal plating, fluorinated gases, medical devices, transport, electronics and semiconductors, construction material, lubricants, petroleum and mining, and energy sectors. However, following the receiving over 5,600 comments during the first 6-month consultation, the dossier submitter added 8 additional sectors to the proposal. So the scope has expanded, covering further uses, being printing, sealing, machinery, military, explosive, technical, textile, and other medical application. Important to note that these 8 sectors have not been evaluated in detail by REACH and SEAC, as they came in later in the procedure. And based on that, SEAC cannot conclude whether derogations proposed by the dossier submitter for specific uses within the scope of these added sectors are justified, and they recommend for now a time-limited derogation until a full evaluation is completed. To dive in the REACH opinion now, I will just give a few key points. So the REACH, to explain, had assessed whether PFAS pose risks to the people and the environment. First important point is that REACH supports the broad definition that covers all PFAS under the OECD definition. That means the over 10,000 substances in the scope of this proposal. They agree that the grouping helps prevent the regrettable substitution, so you cannot simply replace one PFAS with another PFAS. A second point is there is no safe level for release, as any emission contributes to the long-term risks. Therefore, REACH treats PFAS as a non-threshold substance, and the goal is to minimize all emissions, not just reduce them to a safe limit. According to REACH, the most effective measure is to reduce risks at all times. So generally, they do not support the derogations except for the certain high performance protective equipments. And regarding their main conclusions, RAC is of the opinion that PFAS are a serious long-term concern and EU-wide action is needed. If derogations are granted, emissions still to be minimized as much as possible. For allowed uses, RAC recommends additional risk management measures being supply chain communication, consumer information on safe use and waste disposal, monitoring emission and reporting, site-specific industrial PFAS management plans, and harmonized enforcement and standardized analytical methods are essential for an efficient implementation of these measures. From SEAC's opinion side, to explain SEAC's role, SEAC look into a broader socioeconomic impact as they take RAC risk assessment into account, but they go beyond the risk alone. They weigh the benefits of reducing risk against the negative societal impacts. Factors that SEAC look into is related also to the availability of the alternative. So if suitable alternatives are available, the negative impact of the ban are likely to be smaller. For example, the reformulation costs. And if suitable alternatives are not available, the negative impacts are likely to be much larger, like the reduced product performance, discontinuation of production, supply chain disruption, and so on. So from SEAC's conclusion to support, they mainly support a ban with use-specific derogation. No derogation is needed for certain uses, and when the derogation are justified for other uses where evidence supports them. Please note that the SEAC draft opinion is available, and they specify or they go into further conclusions on the proposed derogations in their tables. For example, Table 9 of the SEAC draft opinion lists the conclusion on the proposed derogation. However, they also list additional derogation considered under Table 10 of the draft opinion. From SEAC's side, more derogation may still be needed for some uses to make the restriction proportionate, as uncertainties are also available. SEAC prevents specifying these additional derogations. So to summarize, RAC had looked into whether PFAS are dangerous enough for an EU-wide restriction. From their status is finalized and is adopted. However, as mentioned, they did not look into the additional sectors added later in the process. The SEAC final opinion is ongoing. It is expected by the end of 2026. They had looked to whether the restrictions are proportionate and to see if the benefits outweighs the costs. They had recently finished with a public consultation that ran from March 2020, from March 25th to May 25th. And this consultation had focused mainly on the potential socioeconomic impacts of restricting PFAS across the various sectors and the availability and feasibility of alternatives. Please note that this last consultation did not have or did not require information on hazard and risk, as they were not considered as they were covered by the RAC opinion. What was the result of this consultation? 3,500 comments were received by ECA. These information or the information from these comments are going to be assessed by SEAC to either confirm or modify their opinion. So as mentioned, SEAC's final opinion is expected to be adopted by the end of 2026. And the next steps will be then the submission of the opinions to the European Commission. Then the Commission may propose a restriction for discussion and vote in the REACH committee, which is composed by the EU member states. So how to start getting ready? The earliest that the general prohibition could take effect late 2028 or 2029, depending on the pace of the legislative process. However, manufacturers operating in derogated sectors must comply with the additional obligation being the monitoring, the reporting, labeling, from the date of entry into force. My colleague Xavier will go through the implication for industry and the supply chain in a later presentation. And for now, please find some additional information and useful links in this slide on the ECA website, but also on our REACH.lu website. From my side, this will be the end of my presentation. I will pass it now to have a focus on the two sectors of major importance in Luxembourg, being the F-gases and the construction products. And for that, as mentioned already earlier, we are having the insights from two dossier submitters who kindly agreed to join us today. So we have Audun Hagelund, who is a senior advisor at the Norwegian Environment Agency. Audun has a PhD in organic chemistry, and he has approximately 12 years of experience with PFAS at the Norwegian Environment Agency. Since 2020, he has coordinated the Norwegian efforts on the EU restriction proposal for PFAS. Currently, he's shifting his focus to the regulation of industrial emissions, including PFAS. We also have Peter Juel-Nielsen working with the chemical regulation within the chemicals unit of the Danish Environmental Protection Agency. He holds a master degree in biology from the University of Southern Denmark, and his core expertise covers PFAS and chemicals in consumer products. He serves as the Danish representative of the Universal PFAS restriction proposal, where he led the development of the sector on the construction, energy, and electronics and semiconductors. He's recently started working on the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, which also have a focus on POPs and PFAS. So I will give the floor now to Audun, who's going to start the presentation.
And good morning, everyone. What Peter and I are going to talk about is, first, we will give some general points from the PFAS restriction, building on what Gaia has already explained in her presentation. And then we will say something more specific about fluorinated gases and construction products. So next slide, please. The Universal Restriction Proposal for PFAS was submitted in 2023. You can go back to the previous slide, I think. Yes, thanks. By the 5 countries, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, as we know. And the proposal and the process to consider it at ECA has already been described by Gaia. But a point to add to that is that all the 5 countries had been active in the field of PFAS in the years before the PFAS restriction as well. We were working either separately or, for example, 2 countries jointly on smaller restrictions or projects within PFAS. And therefore, it was a quite natural step to take when the 5 countries joined forces and decided to address the whole class of PFAS substances altogether. And during the process, we have worked very well together, and we have contributed with the different kinds of competence from the countries in order to cover all what was needed in order to develop this restriction proposal, which is a document covering about 3,300 pages. Next slide, please. So this slide contains a lot of text, and I don't expect you to read all of it now, but the point is just to illustrate what kind of information is available. And you can find the same figure in a summary that is linked to on one of the later slides in the presentation. If you go back one slide. Thanks. And on the screen, you can see now all the different uses that were assessed in the universal PFAS restriction. And in the big purple box, you can find all the separate sectors. That is the same as Gaia's list in her presentation. And in the pink box, you can see 4 different overarching applications. So, for example, sealing is one such overarching sector, and sealings are used within many of the different separate sectors, but sealings has been assessed on its own in a separate chapter as an overarching application in the restriction proposal. We also have made cross-cutting assessments of things like the second-hand market, spare parts, recycled materials, and research and development, as well as we have also evaluated the manufacture of PFAS, and that is needed in order to produce PFAS that are needed for the derogated uses. And in the figure, we have tried to explain what specific applications are covered, and that is the reason for all this small text on the screen. And an important point is that also the 8 new sectors are included in the figure. So from the dossier submitter side, we have evaluated all the 8 additional uses and developed new chapters in the proposal, just in the usual way, as it is done when such information is disclosed in the public consultation. Next slide, please. And then you can press one more time. Perfect. So this slide shows both the tonnages and emissions for each of the new sectors, and it is estimated for 2020. So that is before the restriction is introduced or without the restriction. So it represents the now situation. And in total, it is estimated that between 190 and 340 tons of PFAS are introduced to the market annually. And we can see that Tulak is to the far right, which is textiles and similar things. That is one of the biggest sectors. Followed by application of fluorinated gases and also the transport sector, which includes high volumes of PFAS refrigerant in air conditioning systems as well. And at the low end, we find ski wax, which is also an important application, as the human exposure is particularly high during the use stage of ski wax. And construction product is also found quite far towards the high end, and as such, it represents one of the more considerable sectors on the basis of tonnages and emissions. And if we look at the emissions over a 30-year period from 2025 to 2055, it's estimated that we will save 4.7 million tons of PFAS emissions with our recommended restriction solution. So next slide, please. The restriction proposal targets both the manufacture, placing on the market, and use of PFAS, which has been usual for the previous specific PFAS restrictions. And there will be an 18 months general transition time for the restriction as a whole. And a number of derogations for specific applications has been proposed by the dossier submitter, and generally they are time limited with transition times of either 6.5 or 13.5 years. And the number of proposed derogation is quite considerable, so they don't fit into 1 or 2 slides on the screen, but they can be found in the proposal or in a summary that I will mention in a few minutes. The dossier submitter has also proposed reporting obligations associated with several of the derogations, and the primary idea behind this is that this information will lead to increased knowledge about the relevant uses and their magnitudes. And lastly, we have suggested site-specific management plans relating to the use of PFAS-based materials like fluoropolymers in order to ensure good control of the materials and safe handling at end of life at the different industrial sites. Slide, please. This slide shows a bit the methodology we have used in the restriction dossier. So for each of the sectors, we have looked at specific uses. Let's call them use A, B, and C. And for each specific use, we have evaluated the availability of alternatives. So if non-PFAS alternatives are available and implementable already, there will only be the general 18 months transition time. If time is still required to implement alternatives that in general are already known, we have proposed 5 years on top of the 18 months. And if R&D is still needed in order to develop such alternatives, a 12-year derogation time has been suggested. And with this methodology, we have arrived at the general ban with a list of specific time-limited derogations as our preferred restriction option, which we call restriction option 2. But we have also looked at a third restriction option, which is continued use under strict conditions rather than a ban, but only when there is basis for this in the information that has been submitted to the public consultation. Next slide, please. So there are 3 different concentration limits that have been included in the restriction proposal. First, we have 25 ppb for individual PFAS, and that is as measured with targeted PFAS analysis. And this is limited by the availability of analytical reference standards that are needed in order to do such measurements. And today there are something like between 40 and 70 reference standards available, depending a little bit on the labs. We have a limit of 250 ppbs for the sum of PFAS, again as measured with targeted PFAS analysis. And in this case, we have indicated that the top analysis may be applied. That is degradation of precursors under oxidative conditions prior to the analysis. This procedure will uncover precursor substances that are not possible to quantify without the degradation step. And finally, there is a limit of 50 ppm. The idea is to measure the organic fluorine content present with a total fluorine method. And this method will include all PFAS in the sample, even polymeric PFAS, which is different from the 2 previous concentration limits. But as the analysis also include potential non-PFAS organofluorine compounds, there is a need to add a step to confirm the nature of the fluorine measured as either PFAS or non-PFAS. And this could be done either by supply chain information or by additional analysis. And in the restriction proposal, there is a comprehensive overview of analytical methods for PFAS that may be found in Annex E or even in an appendix as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide shows a scientific paper that describes a possible workflow for checking whether a sample is compliant with applicable PFAS regulations or not, with a special focus on the upcoming PFAS restriction in the EU. And members of the restriction team are among the authors of this paper, alongside some of the best scientists in the field of PFAS analysis. And the idea is to do compliance testing stepwise according to the limit values that I showed on the previous slide. So in step 1 in this approach, you check for total fluorine, and in the case that the levels are above 50 ppm, you will need to check for the presence of CF2 or CF3 groups to confirm PFAS in the step 2, either by using information about the use of chemicals from the supply chain or with analytical methods, for example, using NMR or pyrolysis GCMS. If you are still above 50 ppm for PFAS after this confirmation step, the product is non-compliant. And if you did not detect total fluorine above 50 ppm in step 1, or you are above or you are below 50 ppm CF2 or CF3 after verifying the nature of the total fluorine in step 2, you will need to do targeted PFAS measurements as a step 3 in order to compare the limit with the limit values of 25 and 250 ppbs. Next slide, please. There are a couple of links that may be useful. So first of all, there is a link to the full background document on top, which is the updated restriction proposal after taking relevant information from the public consultation into account. So this is a 3,300-page document, but we have also developed and published a 20-page summary that could be convenient for the ones who do not have the time or the desire to read the full document. And this is relatively practical oriented. You can find a summary that contains detailed descriptions of the scope of each of the sectors in there, but you can also find a list of all the proposed derogations in the table at the end of the summary, grouped within each of the sectors in the proposal. So next slide, please. Yeah, so now I'll say something about the application of fluorinated gases, which is a sector that was assessed with Norway as the lead country. This is usually one of my favorite slides when I'm giving presentations, but I'm not going to go into all the details today. The gas flask in the middle of the screen represents the PFAS refrigerant that may be used for different purposes, like, for example, cooling and air conditioning. And these applications are among the major uses of PFAS when you look at both tonnages and emissions. And if you look at chemistry, the substance HFO 1234YF, quite close to the gas flask, is one of the modern PFAS refrigerants. And TFA to the right on the screen is one of the key degradation products from many fluorinated gases. Next slide, please. So this slide explains some of the major concerns with the application of fluorinated gases. If we start on the left-hand side, we have applications of fluorinated gases for different purposes. And from these applications, there are certain leakages and emissions of fluorinated gases will lead to global warming in the atmosphere. And this is regulated in the F-gas regulation already. However, in addition, many fluorinated gases degrade in the atmosphere with formation of persistent PFAS degradation products like TFA. And these degradation products precipitate to the ground with rain and snow and end up in the environment. And this is not addressed in the F-gas regulation. But the concern of persistent degradation products fits very well within the REACH. And this is a natural part of the PFAS restriction, as the degradation products show completely typical PFAS behavior. Next slide, please. So this is a different way of illustrating the concern. F-gases include different types of compounds. The old types of F-gases typically contribute to global warming through their high global warming potential. And this is covered by the F-gas regulation. While the new type of F-gases, like the HFOs, have lower contribution to global warming. But on the other hand, they degrade with formation of high amounts of persistent degradation products like TFA. And this means that you are solving one problem, but at the same time, you're creating a new one simultaneously. And I would also like to add that TFA was evaluated in REACH just a few weeks ago, and classification was adopted both for persistent and mobile properties, and also as a substance toxic for reproduction. Next slide, please. We have evaluated different specific applications of fluorinated gases, and on the screen you can see the main subgroups of applications. And in the restriction proposal, the different sub-applications have been covered in separate sub-chapters, and much more information and details can be found in there. But refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pumps represent the major classical applications. Home blowing agents also represent considerable volumes, while there are also other important areas with somewhat lower volumes, like, for example, fire suppressing agents, which are different from firefighting foam, and also insulating gases in electrical equipment. Next slide, please. We have looked at the volumes and emissions for fluorinated gases, again in 2020, that is without the PFAS restriction. And we estimated that about 60,000 tons of PFAS F-gases were used annually, while the emissions amounted to about 30,000 tons in total. And this pie chart shows the relative contributions to the emissions from each of the specific applications of fluorinated gases. And we can see that commercial refrigeration, as well as mobile and stationary air conditioning combined contribute to as much as 75% of the emissions. So next slide, please. And now I hand over to my colleague Peter, who will take you through the construction products.
Thank you, Auden and Gaia, for this introduction into PFAS and the PFAS restriction proposal. I will shortly just introduce the construction sector. Yes, next slide, please. So for the construction sector, we have a lot of different uses where there are some key functional properties that is quite widespread. So we have some coating and paint application where the properties often are wetting or leveling, weather resistance, UV resistance, and even water and oil repellents are needed. There are also corrosive resistance needed for metal parts. It can be also in piping, as well as chemical resistance, similarly in piping. Other uses apply thermal resistance and flame retardancy. This can be in electrical installations, such as cables and wires. And lastly, we also have a low coefficient of friction needed, such as in building and bridge bearings, and also lubricants, but they are actually covered in another sector. Generally, the main uses in the construction sector are fluoropolymers. These are PTFE, as you may know, as Teflon on your pans normally, and then we have PVDF. And some of the product types you can see here below on the slide and are often used in plumbing applications and so on. Next slide, please. So this is similar to the slide Orton presented earlier, just to highlight how broad the construction sector actually is, because some uses are covered in the construction sector, but when it made more sense, when there are some overarching uses, then they are covered elsewhere. So looking into the overarching, more generic applications of PFAS, you have the electronics and semiconductors, lubricants, sealing applications, and machinery applications. And these are all covered in different sectors to make a similar assessment for all these uses. Then we have individual uses that made more sense elsewhere, like energy. We have the wind turbines, then fluorinated gases, as Auden covered. We have the foam blowing agents. Then we also have some uses relevant for construction in metal plating. In transport, we have the vehicles used, the construction vehicles, industrial vehicles. And then at construction sites, you also have the construction tents, you have some architectural membranes and so on. These are covered under technical textiles. And lastly, we have some explosives used for construction as well. That's covered in the new explosive sector. So it covers quite broadly. It is included quite broadly in a lot of different sectors. So that's something you need to be aware of when reading through the restriction proposal. Next slide, please. Generally, for the construction sector in 2020, it was calculated that approximately 13,000 tons were used, which would result in emissions of 4,000 tons of PFAS, which includes the waste stage. These emissions comes throughout the life cycle. As Auden mentioned, the PFAS manufacturing is covered elsewhere, so this is only for the production of mixtures, the application, a coating of some sort on the surface, and then throughout the life cycle, 17 years or something like that of emissions from paints into the environment. And then lastly, the waste stage, where we have incineration, recovery processes, water treatment plants and landfills. All of these are part of the emissions that we calculated for. And for this sector, the primary concerns are actually the outdoor applications and uses where we have direct emissions. Next slide, please. So generally, PFAS is actually known as a universal use of some sort, at least some of the fluoropolymers are. And that also means that it is quite hard to replace these products. And you have to keep in mind that not one fits all, like PFAS. So when looking at alternatives, try to look at one or two properties instead, where they actually might be better than PFAS. We have some ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, which is actually quite good at chemical resistance and wear resistance, whereas silicone is some of the alternatives for weathering or water repellency. And then looking also at the metals and ceramics, we have some good properties as well, with high temperature resistance, wear resistance, and durability. So it is possible actually to replace PFAS in a lot of uses, and in some cases the alternatives are better. You just have to look properly at the different properties that you need. Next slide, please. And lastly, this is just a slide covering all of, or at least the ones found relevant for the construction sector with the different derogations. You can look into this later, but based on these derogations, we looked at the proportionality between the costs and the effectiveness emission reduction, where we found that a complete ban for the construction sector would not be proportionate. The cost would be too high, while of course we reduce the emissions significantly. We support another restriction option instead, where we have these time limited derogation and a few unlimited, like the refrigerants and like equipment in buildings where safety standards require these uses. So this was actually some of all of these derogations that are proposed that is relevant, and a lot of them are new in the derogation or changed from the original proposal from 2023. I think that's about it for me. So yeah, next slide. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Audun, and thank you, Peter, for this presentation. Next, for us, we will have a presentation from our helpdesk colleague, Xavier, who will present in French, and for this, the focus on the implication on the supply chain. So just a small introduction of Xavier, although I think many of you have known him for other presentation with our help desk. So he holds a master's in electrochemistry and electrometallurgy. He has more than 20 years of experience around the regulations and evaluation of chemicals in the steel industry, and he also has masters in environmental and industrial biotechnology. With these experience, he has also joined us in 2022 to cover lots of the topics we work on related to circular economy, the construction and textile sector, and he focused on the reuse and recycling issues, in particular legacy contaminants and European chemicals regulation. For this, I will let Xavier lead the presentation.
Oui, bonjour à tous. Donc, je m'appelle Xavier Verny et donc je vais vous présenter les implications pour l'industrie et la chaîne d'approvisionnement et comment se préparer à la future restriction sur les PFAS. La structure de la présentation, donc pour vous préparer à la future restriction sur les PFAS. Donc, je vais vous présenter une approche générale en plusieurs étapes. Donc, la première étape consiste à identifier les substances concernées. La deuxième étape, à rechercher des alternatives. La troisième étape, à surveiller vos rejets. La quatrième étape, tout ce qui est formation en interne par rapport à vos collègues. Et la dernière étape, une étape importante, qui est vraiment d'avoir un suivi réglementaire sur toutes les réglementations autour des PFAS. Donc, concernant la première étape qui concerne l'identification des substances, donc cela consiste à réaliser un inventaire précis de la présence de PFAS dans vos produits, matières premières et procédés de fabrication. Donc, par rapport à la définition qui a été présentée tout au départ par ma collègue Raya dans le cadre de l'OCDE. Donc, pour faire un inventaire précis, vous pouvez vous aider des fiches de données de sécurité qui sont à votre disposition concernant les substances et les mélanges qui sont utilisés sur votre site. Vous pouvez aussi consulter la base de données SKIP, puisqu'il faut savoir que certains PFAS sont considérés comme des substances très préoccupantes, donc en anglais « substance of very high concern ». Il y a aussi, comme vous êtes utilisateur, vous pouvez être utilisateur en aval, vous pouvez aussi avoir une relation avec vos fournisseurs, en particulier pour les articles que vous pourriez utiliser sur votre site de production. Et si vous avez un doute par rapport à la présence de PFAS dans les substances, mélanges ou articles qui entrent sur votre site de production, vous pouvez envisager de faire des analyses. Donc simplement pour vous rappeler que vous faites partie d'une chaîne d'approvisionnement. Donc vous pouvez être fournisseur, utilisateur en aval ou utilisateur final. Donc, et vous avez une relation qui se lie entre les fournisseurs, les utilisateurs et les utilisateurs finaux. Donc, par exemple, si vous êtes un utilisateur en aval, vous devez informer votre fournisseur quant à l'utilisation d'une substance. Si vous êtes fournisseur, vous devez informer le client sur les propriétés intrinsèques et gestion des risques. Donc, toute cette communication se fait par exemple à travers les fiches de données de sécurité qui sont vraiment le support de communication à privilégier tout au long de la chaîne d'approvisionnement. Donc, qui est un élément qui peut vous aider aussi à identifier les substances PFAS. Comme cela a été mentionné par rapport aux analyses et par rapport à l'approche qu'il faut avoir en termes de présence ou non de PFAS et par rapport à ce qui est proposé dans la restriction universelle sur les PFAS, je vous donne aussi un exemple de ce qui a été publié par la Commission européenne dans le cadre de la réglementation emballage et déchets d'emballage, qui s'aligne avec ce qui est proposé dans la restriction PFAS. Donc, c'est simplement tout d'abord voir en termes de fluor total si vous êtes inférieur à 50 mg par kilo. Donc, c'est les fameux 50 ppm qui ont été présentés tout à l'heure. À ce moment-là, vous avez une présomption de conformité par rapport à la présence de PFAS dans les substances, mélanges ou articles que vous pourrez utiliser sur votre site de production. Ou si vous avez un fluor total qui est supérieur à 50 ppm, à ce moment-là, il y a des analyses complémentaires à effectuer. Donc, cette approche s'aligne par rapport à ce qui a été présenté tout à l'heure dans la restriction universelle des PFAS. Ensuite, concernant l'étape numéro 2, ce qui est concernant la recherche d'alternatives par rapport aux PFAS, donc en plus de ce qui a été présenté tout à l'heure dans le secteur de la construction, donc vous pouvez explorer des alternatives possibles plus respectueuses de la santé et de l'environnement. Donc, je vous ai donné là quelques liens vers, par exemple, une base de données de l'OCDE où il y a eu des documents qui ont été publiés sur des alternatives, notamment tout ce qui est huile et lubrifiant, mais aussi tout ce qui est dans les peintures et les vernis. Donc, vous avez les liens directement dans la présentation. Vous pouvez aussi consulter la base de données qui a été mise en place et qui est gratuite et que vous pouvez utiliser, qui s'appelle Chemsec Marketplace. Vous avez le lien où vous pouvez par exemple filtrer et retrouver aussi des alternatives possibles en termes d'utilisation de PFAS sur votre site de production. Troisième étape, c'est vraiment de surveiller les possibles rejets que vous pourriez avoir dans l'environnement qui concernent l'air, l'eau, le sol, mais aussi tout ce qui est plantes. Vous pouvez penser à mettre en place des dispositifs de contrôle des émissions de PFAS, bien sûr en conformité avec la réglementation au Luxembourg actuelle sur les établissements classés. Donc là, je vous ai mis aussi le lien sur la réglementation spécifique aux établissements classés au Luxembourg. Ensuite, simplement pour vous informer, si vous n'étiez pas au courant, qu'il y a aussi eu un rapport qui a été publié sur les travaux qui ont été réalisés entre 2024 et 2026. Et il y a eu la création d'un groupe interministériel par le ministre de l'Environnement, du Climat et de la Biodiversité en coopération avec d'autres ministères, dont notamment le ministère de la Santé, de la Sécurité sociale et le ministère de l'Agriculture et de l'Alimentation et de la Viticulture. Donc, ce rapport présente environ 40 différentes actions autour des PFAS. Et simplement pour vous donner un peu d'informations par rapport à l'histoire, ce groupe interministériel a été créé à la suite de la détection de la substance TFA, dont on a parlé tout à l'heure dans les slides d'avant. Donc, TFA trifluoroacétique. Donc, et 40 actions qui se tournent sur 4 axes principaux. Donc, d'abord, une augmentation de la connaissance autour des PFAS. L'axe numéro 2, c'est vraiment la surveillance, donc améliorer et intensifier la surveillance des PFAS. L'action numéro 3, c'est vraiment de mettre en œuvre des mesures de réduction de la pollution et de diminuer les risques liés à l'exposition de la population et des écosystèmes. Et l'axe numéro 4, c'est la partie sensibilisation. Donc, mieux informer le public et renforcer la transparence et tenir une communication claire autour de la problématique des PFAS. Simplement pour vous informer, mais ça a été dit tout à l'heure aussi dans les slides précédents, Donc simplement, là dernièrement, dans le cadre du processus d'harmonisation de la classification autour de la réglementation CLP de l'acide trifluoroacétique. Alors vous avez sur le slide à gauche la classification actuelle du trifluoroacétique et vous avez à droite tout ce qui a été proposé dans le cadre de la décision du comité d'évaluation des risques, donc le RAC. Donc en vert, vous avez ce qui a été proposé au départ par l'auteur de la soumission. Et en orange, vous avez ce qui a été rajouté dans la décision finale du RAC. Donc vous voyez qu'on passe d'une classification toxique, corrosif et aquatique à une classification toxique pour la reproduction de catégorie 1B avec la phrase de risque H360DF. Aussi une classification pour tout ce qui concerne les effets persistants, mobiles et toxiques, PMT, avec la phrase spécifique à l'Europe qui est EU 450. Vous avez aussi une classification pour VPVM, donc très persistant, très mobile. Et donc voilà, donc vous avez une proposition actuelle de la classification du trifluoroacétique en termes d'effets sur la reproduction. Et vous avez en dessous aussi, il y a eu une décision au niveau du RAC sur la classification des sels de TFA, où actuellement il n'y avait pas de classification harmonisée, et on passe à une proposition du RAC en termes d'une classification toxique pour la reproduction, PMT, VPVM, comme le TFA précédemment. Ensuite, en ce qui concerne l'étape 4, c'est vraiment de former vos équipes en interne sur votre site de production, c'est-à-dire les informer sur les obligations réglementaires et les bonnes pratiques pour assurer une transition sans rupture au niveau de votre site de production. Et enfin, la dernière étape, c'est vraiment d'assurer un suivi réglementaire et de suivre vraiment les différentes échéances concernant les différents secteurs d'utilisation des PFAS en gardant à l'esprit toutes les dates de mise en application de la restriction pour vous mettre en conformité à temps. Et aussi de vous informer concernant les futures évolutions réglementaires sur les PFAS. Donc, pour ça, vous pouvez notamment consulter le site REACH&CLP, le site mvelt.lu de l'administration de l'environnement, le site de l'ECA qui va vous donner accès à des guides pratiques, des textes officiels et des outils d'accompagnement. Donc là, je vais aller assez rapidement puisque ce sera présenté dans la future présentation de l'administration de l'environnement par Kim. C'est simplement pour vous dire qu'au niveau européen, il y a déjà des restrictions qui existent et qui concernent les substances PFAS, notamment dans le cadre de la Convention de Stockholm et du règlement POP. Donc, vous avez là à peu près une timeline de 2009 à 2025 de l'ensemble des substances qui ont été réglementées dans le cadre de la Convention de Stockholm ou dans le cadre du règlement POP. Ensuite, concernant les restrictions, vous avez aussi une vision des premières restrictions qui datent de 2019 avec les références des différentes entrées de l'annexe 17 de REACH pour les différentes substances qui sont considérées comme des substances PFAS. Et simplement aussi pour vous informer que les PFAS sont aussi réglementés dans d'autres réglementations européennes ou nationales. Donc, par exemple, tout ce qui concerne les eaux destinées à la consommation humaine, dans le cadre de la loi du 23 décembre 2022 au Luxembourg, vous avez des concentrations à respecter, notamment en la concentration des 20 PFAS, qui doit être inférieure à 0,1 microgramme par litre, depuis le 12 janvier 2026. Et vous avez aussi depuis le 7 août 2024 une obligation en termes de la concentration totale en PFAS qui doit être inférieure à 0,5 microgrammes par litre. Vous avez aussi des limites de concentration qui existent pour tout ce qui est denrées alimentaires qui ont été mises en place par l'Agence européenne de la sécurité alimentaire, donc l'EFSA. Donc vous avez une somme de différents PFAS qui a été considéré comme un niveau sûr pour la santé humaine, donc dans les denrées alimentaires, avec une limite de 4,4 nanogrammes par kilo de poids corporel par semaine. Et basé sur cette valeur, dans le cadre du règlement 2023-915 de la Commission, des limites ont été fixées pour ces substances dans certains produits d'origine animale. Prochain slide. Voilà. Donc je crois que pour moi, c'est fini.
Merci Xavier. Oui, en effet. On va passer à la prochaine présentation. So for the next presentation, we will have the intervention of our Administration de l'Environnement. Kim Engels, who's working within the Chemical Substance and Product unit of the AEV. Also, I will give a small introduction to keep the consistency. So Kim holds a master's in molecular biology from the University of Zurich, followed by a PhD in molecular biology and a postdoc at the Institute for Molecular Cancer Research of the University of Zurich. Now he is applying his scientific expertise to the chemical regulations and their enforcement, focusing on chemical products and the hazardous substances. I will give the floor to Kim. However, I will be in charge of the slides due to this technical issues that I will apologize again for.
Thank you, Gaia, for the nice introduction, and thank you to colleagues who spoke before for the nice overview about the upcoming universal PFAS restriction. As Gaia mentioned, I'm working for the Chemical Substances and Products Unit at the Environment Agency, and we are not only the competent authority for REACH, CLP and POPs, but we also the National Enforcement Authority. And from this perspective, I want to show you a bit today what we are currently or in the recent past have been working on. So next slide, please. So as my colleague quickly mentioned before, not only there's an upcoming universal PFAS restriction, but there are actually also restrictions for PFAS substances which are already in force. So under the POPs legislation, which is the European legislation for the Universal Stockholm Convention, already since 2009, there exists the so-called PFAS group of substances restriction. Most of these substances have been phased out since a while now, and years ago when we did the first inspections of PFAS substances, we actually did not find any products which still contain PFAS substances. More recently, in 2020, there was the group of PFOA substances which were restricted under POPs. Then in 2022, the group of PFHXS substances were restricted. And currently, there's an ongoing procedure under the POPs to restrict also the long-chained PFCAs. And one can mention here that there's also a restriction already in force under the REACH legislation. Next slide, please. Under the REACH legislation, there is since 2023 the restriction on the PFCAs. More recently, the PFHXA restriction was voted and is in force. And there was also a vote already on the PFAS in firefighting foams restriction. And that's what Gaia mentioned, that firefighting foams will be exempted from the universal PFAS restriction. And the reason is simply that for the firefighting foams, there is already a restriction which is in force, but the application dates will only be at the end of 2026. And yeah, as you've heard previously a lot about the universal PFAS restriction, so that will be a good thing because it will regroup most of the previous restrictions under one universal PFAS restriction. What Gaia mentioned already is something that we see in all sectors actually. When one specific substance is restricted, then often it's being replaced by similar substances which have the same profile, the same risk health profile. So therefore it is important to have a universal restriction that covers all similar substances, so that not one bad, let's say, or hazardous substance is replaced simply by another hazardous substance. Next slide, please. So, what have we been doing recently concerning the enforcement of PFAS substances? Well, in 2024, initiated by the European Chemicals Agency Forum, there was a pilot project on the enforcement of restrictions of PFCAs and related substances, focusing on cosmetics products. So 13 European countries participated. In total, nearly 4,500 cosmetic products were inspected. And the most frequently found substances in the cosmetic products were perfluoronyl dimeticon and also the D5 siloxanes. In total, 285 non-compliant cosmetic products were withdrawn from the market, and in Luxembourg, we tested nearly 50 products, and 15 out of these products were found to be non-compliant because they contained a PFAS substance. Next slide, please. So last year we participated in a European Union-funded joint enforcement action. This action is called CASP, which stands for Coordinated Activities on the Safety of Products. There are sector-specific activities. We participate in the chemicals sector activity, and member states had the choice of a few different kind of categories of substances that could be tested. And since PFAS substances are becoming more and more a priority area, not only for enforcement, but also in the general population, in politics, they are widely being discussed. They're discovered in more and more places in the environment. That's why we also opted for the PFAS option. We were able to test on this project 12 outdoor clothes for kids. They were tested for most PFAS restrictions which are already in force nowadays. And one can maybe mention here that they were all tested according to the new PFAS in textiles norm, which covers most of the currently banned PFAS substances. 5 out of the 12 products which we tested were non-compliant, which is quite a bad result. And most companies accepted these findings, and it is widely known in the textile sector that this new norm can discover substances that the previous norm could simply not detect. This is due to the extraction method. And there's even one company which still has an ongoing court case with us because they challenged our decision because they were not okay that we use this new testing norm. But yeah, the restricted substance was found, and according to REACH, you're never bound to a certain testing norm, but you're bound to using the best available testing norm, and this is simply, for the moment, the best available testing norm. So this is something that the textile sector now is quite rapidly adapting to, and we see that the new tests they are sending in are always according to this new test norm also. Next slide, please. So what we usually do when we find a lot of non-compliances in a certain sector, like we did now for this PFAS testing in the textiles, we do usually a national campaign. So we recently acquired 50 different outdoor clothing samples, and they have been sent off to the laboratory now to be tested for PFAS. We also this year participate in a JACOB project. Those are also European Union funded joint testing campaigns. JACOB stands for Joint Actions on Compliance of Products. So the European Union funds these projects. There's one European common laboratory which is being chosen. And this project was also coordinated and initiated by the ECHA Forum. It is possible to take consumer articles for this project or also mixtures. The exact scope for us needs to be determined. We are not 100% sure yet because we test already so many clothing samples, so most likely we'll now choose different products, probably mixtures will be chosen. And initially, we also thought about testing this year PFAS in firefighting foams. But as the restriction, the last deadline for entry into force of this restriction is only end of 2026, we will most likely do the enforcement of PFAS in firefighting foams only in 2027. So next slide, please. Yeah, as already mentioned, PFAS substances are an area of priority. We will also in the near future continue testing PFAS in products. As you've seen from the numbers, we quite regularly found restricted substances. We will also in the near future continue testing a lot of PFAS in products. With the universal PFAS restriction coming up, this will only grow. So we are trying now, and that's why also we like to contribute to events like these. It is very important to raise awareness among the companies about the current restrictions which are already there, but especially also about the upcoming restrictions. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact me or the help desk to get support on these issues. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kim. Just as I don't see any questions to our speakers on the content of today's presentations, I'm assuming it was all clear. Then I will proceed by reminding you that the slides and the recording will be available on our website under the event section, in the archive section of the event page. It will also be available on our Chemicals and Environment Luxembourg YouTube channel. We will inform once everything is available via the news. Just before finishing, I also remind you that our newsletters and social media channels are there for you to have information not only about our activity but on relevant topics that we're covering. And as a future webinars, we're planning a webinar on the microplastics restriction with a focus on beauty and cosmetic sectors. The date is still to be confirmed for this event. However, we have a confirmed webinar on the 26th of November on the basics of REACH&CLP regulations. This is a webinar that we often come to, as it is often required from or people, companies often ask us to have this reminder on the obligations under these two regulations. Again, I'm checking if there are any questions. So far, I don't see, unless I'm mistaken, but I would like to take the opportunity to thank our speakers, Audun, Peter, Kim, and of course, Xavier, for joining today and for the efforts to prepare the slides and presenting today. It's very appreciated. I hope that the event have been to your expectation, and I think no one is going to be angry about winning few minutes to the day, as we will finish earlier the webinar as expected by 12. With this, I would like to thank everyone and hopefully see you in a future event. Thank you very much.